It's one of the clusters outlined in the DSM-5, and cluster B personalities are characterized by dramatic and overly emotional, unpredictable, erratic thinking and behaviours. To give you a brief outline of the different personality types, first of all, there's antisocial personality disorder. Here we would see things like psychopathy, sociopathy, and so on. But what we see is like a disregard for things like social norms. We see a disregard for rules. There'll be a lot of rule breaking and so on. There's also a disregard for other people's well-being, for their rights. So they could be repeatedly breaking the rules, violating the rights of others and so on. There can also be impulsivity. They act irresponsibly. They can act very impulsive. It's what's on their mind at the moment, what they want. They would do something, think about the consequences afterwards. So you might meet someone who they're like moving from one partner to the other. They might be moving from one job to the other. They could be irresponsible with their money, even other people's money. There could be a lot of reckless behaviour, and as I say, a disregard for things like the consequences. There can also be a lack of remorse. So you see a callousness here. They can be very cruel. They can also be quite indifferent to the impact of their behaviour on other people. They can rationalise it very quickly. Again, don't show a lot of guilt for the impact of the things they do and say. They can be very deceitful. So there's a lot of lying, habitual lying. Sometimes there doesn't seem to be any reason for the lying. Sometimes it can be tactical. Other times they will just lie because they can. So you see this superficial charms. So they can be very good at conning people for their own personal gain. They can be very aggressive. Sometimes they will be violent, outbursts, swearing, intimidation, things like that. But they can be very hostile. So we see this within the antisocial personality disorder. Then there's borderline personality. And what we see here is this fear of abandonment, fear of being rejected. So you'll find someone, the frantic efforts to avoid, whether it's real or imagined, abandonment or separation. And this can lead to them sometimes being very clingy, but also being very volatile in their relationships. In fact, a lot of the relationships tend to be unstable. On one hand, they're idealizing people one moment, but they're devaluing, maybe attacking them, criticizing them the next. It's almost like this push-pull me with borderline. It's I love you or I hate you, but don't leave me. With borderline, you also see an identity disturbance, okay? So they have a very unstable sense of themselves. And this can lead to sudden changes in their ideas, their goals, the direction they're going in, their values, their long-term plans, their careers, things like that. And again, just like with the antisocial, we will see impulsivity. So there can be reckless behaviours, there could be substance abuse, things like that, drinking, binge eating, things like that. But what you often see is emotional dysregulation and emotional instability. So there can be mood swings. A lot of the time, the reactions to things might seem exaggerated, but they're really over the top. They're not really in proportion to what's going on. Again, it can be the fear of being rejected. They're hurt in that moment. They know they're hurt. They know they're in pain. They can't quite articulate it. And it can sometimes feel like every single person who's ever hurt them, abused them, abandoned them, mistreated them, humiliated them, it all comes out in one go. It comes out at the person that they're attacking, okay? So there's emotional instability. Then we have histrionic personality disorder. And what we see is a lot of excessive attention seeking, okay? Someone with a histrionic personality can feel very uncomfortable if they are not the center of attention. So they can behave very dramatically, very provocatively, very seductively, just to get any kind of attention. With histrionic personality, we also see emotional shallowness, shifting very quickly, between one mood to the other. There'd be a lot of superficial emotions. These swings can be over the top, exaggerated, almost theatrical. It's more like a performance. They can be very seductive, flirting with people, even if they've no intention of going any further with it, or they could be antagonizing. Histrionic people, when they're talking, their speech can be very vague. They could be telling you a story, but there can be far too much detail in one area, but in other areas it lacks detail. They're focusing more on things like style over substance. So the storytelling can be very dramatic. not necessarily telling you what really happened, what the actual story was, but it's very dramatic in how they're telling these things. And sometimes they will dress in ways, style their hair, whatever, to draw attention to themselves through their clothes, their hair, things like that. There's this excessive emphasis on how they look. They're either stunningly drop dead gorgeous or whatever, or they're trying to stick out like a sore thumb. And lastly, narcissistic personality disorder. And here we see an exaggerated sense of self-importance. There's fantasies of how amazing they are. They have unlimited success and power. They're the most beautiful person you've ever met. They're the funniest person, the most intelligent person. There's a lot of competition with the people around them. Again, just like with histrionic, need for attention, with narcissism, we see a need for admiration. So they're constantly seeking and needing praise, compliments, things like that. Wanting special treatment, thinking they're entitled to special treatment. We also see a lack of empathy. So there can be an inability or an unwillingness to recognize or even identify with other people, their feelings, their needs, and so on. With narcissism, it's all about themselves. And the relationships tend to be very exploitative. They take advantage of other people, whether to get them status, achieve their personal ends. A lot of their friendships, even their romantic relationships, tend to be very surface level and very superficial. They can also be incredibly envious, arrogance and envious. Often these go together, as well as jealousy as well. They believe others are envious of them or should be envious of them. If other people aren't envious of them, there's either something wrong with them or they're lying. In reality, they feel envious of others. So you see haughty and often condescending behaviour and attitudes towards other people, even those closest to them. And at their very core is this very fragile sense of themselves. They're very vulnerable to something like criticism. They can be highly resistant to it. They can be overly sensitive to it. Even anything that they would perceive as criticism, that can bring up rage, feelings of humiliation. They feel challenged. They do not like to be challenged. So that's a brief outline of the 4 personality types you will find in the cluster B. When we're looking at dark personality types, things like the Dark Triad, the Dark Tetrad as well, we often see combinations of these things, specifically narcissism and psychopathy. But what you also find is Machiavellianism, and that's being exploitative, that's being duplicitous, being very, very manipulative, doing whatever it is they want, but believing the end justifies the means, and to hell with the casualties, okay? Because whatever their goal was, whatever their plan was, whatever it is they're wanting, that was the important thing. If you're looking at the Dark Tetrad, there is that also that added element of sadism. Sadism is really just cruelty, okay? Now, sadism could be inflicting misery onto other people, whether that's for their own gratification, for their own pleasure, they get a kick out of it, they feel good about it, or they're doing it in order to control. Might not necessarily be getting a kick out of it, it's a means to an end. They terrorize in order to get whatever it is they want. So when you see this combination together, you're going to see someone who believes themselves to be very special. They're entitled to behave the way they want, but they can be very cruel. They can also be callous. But because of a lack of insight and a lack of self-reflection, it's everybody else who is at fault. It's everyone else who is wrong. It's everyone else who has hurt them. They are being the good guy or whatever. And again, with that sadism, they can get a twisted sense of satisfaction, either out of hurting others, maybe they're trying to even the score or whatever. So we see a very vindictive side. But they can even take pleasure in seeing other people in distress. These people, they can be very manipulative. They can be very sneaky. To say they believe the end justifies the means. Sometimes they believe they are on a higher mission because they are superior. They could be more intelligent, believe themselves to be more intelligent, morally superior, things like that. And the things they do, again going to the antisocial side, the things they do, they're just right to do it. They are justified to do it. The rules don't apply to them, which is why it generally doesn't go well whenever they get caught out, or whenever they get held accountable. They're also emotionally dysregulated, and their reactions, as I mentioned earlier, are way out of proportion to whatever it is that's happening. So we often see outrage, temper tantrums. We will sometimes see screaming, rolling about the floor, kicking their legs in the air. We will see intimidation, threats, things like that, until they get their own way. Thing is, we don't just meet people like this in our one-to-one relationships. We're going to meet them in the workplace. We're going to meet them in the little groups we join. We're going to meet them in communities. We might be living next door to them. They may have been in our family of origin, even. We're going to see them everywhere. A lot of times, I suppose we see this kind of behaviour on social media as well. And I think sometimes that detachment, that being able to hide behind a keyboard and a screen can sometimes bring that out in people like this. But whenever they get involved in something, doesn't matter what it is, it could be a relationship with someone, it could be a friendship, it could be the workplace, they get a job. But whenever they get involved in something, they tend to ruin things from the inside. They will ruin that harmony with the other people. It's a very destructive kind of combination of things. So they ruin things from the inside. They ruin groups, they ruin workplaces. If they can't do that, if they can't get into that group, or they can't join that place, or maybe they've been fired or whatever, because of that vindictiveness, what you find is they often try to destroy it from the outside. If they can't destroy it from the inside, they will try to destroy it from the outside. What they do is they find a way to justify their own destructive nature. You hurt me, you rejected me, that makes you bad. I'm on the side of good, or whatever. And a lot of them can be totally convinced that what they believe is true, that they are the good guy, that the other people are the villains. Even if they've been caught doing something, the other people are the villains for catching them. What you commonly find as well is if they don't have one already, they're probably going to find some kind of a belief system, a group of some kind, other like-minded people or whatever, something that's going to validate and justify their own impulsive and often destructive nature. And if they find a group, something like a cult or a cult-like movement, they'll try to present it maybe as some kind of a moral virtue. And this gives them free rein to be cruel and treat others any way they want, treat them disgracefully. Again, when they're in a group of like-minded people that maybe cheer them on, again, that fuels them, that validates them, believing that they are right. And it often fuels your behavior. You'll see them sometimes ramp it up a gear. They will be doing more because of the validation they're getting. And within that little group, yeah, they're all going to be validating and supporting each other. Now, in positions of power, let's say in a workplace, somebody gets the role of a manager, job of a manager, supervisor, or something like that. What you might find is people with these traits all combined, they don't necessarily get a sense of satisfaction from their position or the level of responsibility or even their accomplishments. What they do is they get the satisfaction through the things they get away with. Because they're very manipulative, because of that lust for power and so on, it's almost like everything is a scheme, everything is a scam, and it's what they can get away with. Okay, not necessarily doing things by the rule book or whatever. It's what they can get away with. And they also get a sense of elation, knowing that others might fear them, such as juniors in the workplace, subordinates at work. They will get a feeling of power, knowing that people fear them, that they can get away with things. So people are afraid to stand up to them. And in those positions of power and responsibility, what you find is things start to fall apart. Things get ruined. But the more things start to fall apart and things get ruined, it's got nothing to do with them. It's the horrible, nasty staff that won't do their job properly and things like that. Never anything to do with them.